Linguistics. My brother, a West Point cadet, sneered. What are you going to do with that Nelly talk the enemy to death? My father, a general, set his carving knife down, the sound echoing in the silence of Thanksgiving dinner. This world requires strength, not clever phrases. He looked straight at me, his eyes as cold as ice. It's a distraction, a useless one. They were wrong. They didn't know that the very thing they called useless would become my only weapon when I discovered the honor they worshipped was a lie, and their betrayal nearly cost me my life. Here is the 10-part, 20,000-word story you requested based on the narrative from the video. The ghost of Thanksgiving past has a specific taste: over-roasted turkey, a little dry the way my mother always made it, and the bitter tang of disappointment. It was the year I turned 17, a year that should have been defined by the thrill of possibility, by the crisp acceptance letter from Georgetown University that felt like a golden ticket in my hands. Instead, it was defined by the silence that fell over the mahogany dining table when I announced my chosen path. Our family home in Arlington, Virginia was less a house and more a shrine to the United States Army. Every wall held a piece of my father's legacy. His portrait in full-dress uniform, stern and unyielding, hung in the foyer, his gaze following you like a silent drill instructor. Medals gleamed from shadow boxes, and shelves were heavy with books on military strategy and history. My father, General Marcus Thorne, was a man carved from granite and duty. He saw the world in black and white, in command structures and clear objectives. His son, my older brother Mark, was his perfect heir. Even then, as a fresh-faced cadet at West Point, Mark wore his uniform as if he were born in it. He walked with a ramrod posture, his voice already carrying the clipped, authoritative tone of a future officer. He was the golden son, the continuation of the Thorne legacy, a mirror reflecting my father's pride. And then, there was me, Nellie, the outlier. Where they saw strategy, I saw stories. Where they valued strength, I valued subtlety. While Mark spent his summers at boot camps, I lost myself in the labyrinthine beauty of languages. I devoured French dove into the complex grammar of Arabic and found music in the lilting tones of Farsi. My bedroom was an oasis of words, a stark contrast to the martial order of the rest of the house. My acceptance to Georgetown's prestigious linguistics program was, to me, a validation of this passion. It was proof that my world of words had value. I chose Thanksgiving dinner to share my news, naively believing that the festive spirit might soften the inevitable judgment. The air was thick with the scent of pine from the wreath on the door and the warm aroma of my mother's baking. My father sat at the head of the table, carving the turkey with practiced precision. I have some wonderful news. I began, my voice a little too bright. I received my early acceptance packet from Georgetown. I've been awarded a scholarship for their linguistics program. The carving knife paused mid-slice. My mother offered a tight, supportive smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was a master of quiet diplomacy, a necessary skill for the wife of a general. It was the reaction from my father and brother that I was bracing for. Mark was the first to speak, a smirk playing on his lips. Linguistics, he said, the word dripping with condescension. What are you going to do with that Nelly talk the enemy to death? His laughter, sharp and dismissive, echoed in the sudden quiet. My father placed the carving knife down with a deliberate thud. He wiped his hands on the linen napkin, his eyes locking onto mine. They were the same piercing blue as the winter sky and just as cold. Eleanor, he said, using my full name, a sign of his profound disapproval. We have dedicated our lives to the service of this country. It is a noble calling, a tradition of honor. Your brother understands this. He is preparing to lead men to make decisions that will protect this nation. He gestured vaguely with his hand as if encompassing the entire military-industrial complex. And you You want to study words. The way he said the word made it sound like a child's frivolous hobby, like collecting dolls or pressing flowers. It's more than just words, Dad, I argued, my voice trembling slightly. It's about understanding culture, communication, motivation. It's a strategic tool. A strategic tool, Mark scoffed. West Point teaches strategy. The War College teaches strategy. Analyzing Farsi poetry isn't going to win a war. Your scholarship is a fine academic achievement, my father conceded, his tone leaving no room for debate. But it's a distraction, a useless one. The world is a dangerous place, Eleanor. It requires strength, not clever phrases. In that moment, I felt a chasm open between us, wider and deeper than ever before. I wasn't just a disappointment. I was an irrelevance. My passion, the very core of who I was dismissed as a flight of fancy. I felt invisible, my accomplishments rendered meaningless by their rigid, narrow worldview. The golden ticket in my mind turned to lead. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries, each bite of dry turkey a reminder of the lump of resentment growing in my throat. That night, I lay in my room surrounded by my books, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The dream of Georgetown felt tainted now, a solitary pursuit that would only further alienate me from my family. A rebellious, desperate thought began to form in my mind. It was a reckless, self-destructive idea born from a deep-seated need to prove them wrong, to force them to see me. If they believed the only path to value was through the military, then so be it. I would join the army. I wouldn't just join. I would join the military police corps. I would show them I could be tough, that I could fit their mold. I would walk into their world not as a linguist, but as an MP. I would wear their uniform, learn their rules, and maybe I would finally earn a sliver of their respect. It was a decision made not from patriotism, but from a place of profound hurt and a burning desire to be seen. I would take my love for words, my analytical mind, and I would hide it behind a badge and a sidearm. I would prove that I was more than just a girl with a dictionary, even if it meant becoming someone I wasn't. The irony was bitter, but the resolve was absolute. My war wouldn't be fought in a classroom in Georgetown. It would be fought within the very institution my family held sacred. And I would win on my own terms. The transition from the hallowed, ivy-covered walls of Georgetown to the unforgiving grit of Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, was a culture shock of seismic proportions. I had deferred my scholarship, a decision that baffled my professors and secretly pleased my father, though he never said it outright. He saw it as a temporary, albeit strange, detour before I inevitably came to my senses. He was wrong. Basic training and MP school were a blur of mud sweat and shouted orders. I learned to break down and reassemble an M9 pistol until my fingers were raw. I learned to drive a Humvee with aggressive confidence, to cuff a suspect, and to clear a room with tactical precision. I pushed my body past limits I never knew existed, my muscles screaming in protest. I packed away the part of me that loved poetry and complex syntax, and replaced it with the rigid language of military protocol. I was molding myself into their definition of strength. But you can't completely erase who you are. The ghost of my Georgetown scholarship clung to me. It was there in my file, a single line of text that immediately set me apart. Education, Georgetown University, Linguistics, deferred. My first duty station was with the 55th Military Police Company. From the moment I arrived, I was an anomaly. Most of my peers were high school graduates, solid, no-nonsense types, who had joined for a steady job or a sense of adventure. They were good people, dedicated soldiers. But to them, I was a puzzle. The icy reception began almost immediately. It wasn't overt hostility, but a subtle, pervasive skepticism. My new commanding officer, Captain Davies, a man whose jaw seemed permanently clenched, reviewed my file in our first meeting. His eyes, small and dark, scanned the page, lingering on that one damning line. He leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. "Captain Nellie Ford," He said, his voice flat. Welcome to the 55th. Your record is impressive. Physically, at least. But I have to be honest, I'm not sure what to do with a linguist. He looked at me as if I were an exotic piece of equipment for which he had no manual. I need MPs who can kick down a door and secure a scene. I need soldiers who can handle a riot. I don't need ones who can analyze Farsi poetry. The echo of my brother's words from that Thanksgiving dinner was so perfect, it was almost comical. The message was clear. My greatest intellectual asset was considered my biggest liability. The nicknames started soon after. Georgetown. The professor. But the one that stuck, the one that followed me from the motor pool to the mess hall was the dictionary. It was usually said with a smirk, a verbal pat on the head. Hey, dictionary, you done with that patrol report? Make sure you use some big words for the brass, a sergeant might joke. Don't ask her, ask the dictionary. She probably knows the etymology of latrine duty, another would quip. I tried to ignore it to prove my worth through action. I was always the first to volunteer for the worst assignments, the quickest to finish my PT runs, the most meticulous with my paperwork. I kept my uniform immaculate, my boots polished to a mirror shine. I thought that if I was the perfect MP, they would forget about the linguist. But it was always there, a barrier between me and the easy camaraderie my peers shared. They would swap stories about their hometowns, their cars, their weekend plans. When they looked at me, they saw a temporary visitor, an academic tourist in their world. They couldn't understand why someone with a Georgetown scholarship would trade it for the mud and monotony of MP life. They didn't see the ghost of a general's disapproval that drove me. The isolation was a heavy weight. I spent most of my off-duty hours alone in my small barracks room, not with my beloved books on syntax, but with field manuals. FM 319.4, Military Police Operations. FM 319.1, Military Police Law and Order Operations. I was determined to master their language, to become so fluent in their world that they would have to accept me. Yet my true nature would sometimes break through. During a training exercise simulating a checkpoint in a foreign country, the role player, a local civilian hired for the exercise, was becoming increasingly agitated, shouting in Pashto. The other MPs were escalating with him, their voices loud, their postures aggressive, following their training to project authority. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "Let me try," I said. My squad leader gave me a doubtful look but nodded. I took a deep breath and addressed the man, not in the formal Pashto from a textbook, but in a softer, more respectful dialect I'd studied. I didn't command him. I asked him what was wrong. I used phrases of courtesy, acknowledged his age and his distress. The man's demeanor changed instantly. The anger drained from his face, replaced by surprise. He began to explain, his words tumbling out. His son was sick, and he needed to get to the next village for medicine. The other soldiers hadn't understood. I translated for my squad leader. We inspected his cart, found nothing suspicious, and let him pass. The training supervisor, a grizzled master sergeant, watched the whole exchange with a thoughtful expression. He didn't say anything to me directly, but I saw a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not respect, not yet, but a grudging acknowledgement. My squad, however, was less impressed. "Show off," one of them muttered as we walked away. "Guess the dictionary is useful for something after all," another said, the compliment laced with sarcasm. The incident didn't bridge the gap. It widened it. I had used my unique skill, and instead of earning me a place on the team, it had only reinforced my status as an outsider. I was the strange tool they couldn't quite figure out how to use, and they resented me for it. That night, the loneliness was acute. I had traded one form of isolation for another. At home, I was the intellectual disappointment in a family of warriors. Here I was, the intellectual oddity in a company of soldiers. It seemed I was destined to be a woman caught between two worlds, fully belonging to neither. The uniform felt less like a shield and more like a costume. And as I lay in the dark, the quiet hum of the barracks around me, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. I had set out to prove my worth in their language, but what if in the process I was losing my own? My first deployment was to a forward operating base in the heart of Afghanistan. The dust was a living entity, a fine tan powder that coated everything: our uniforms, our weapons, the back of our throats. The sun was a relentless hammer, and the air hummed with the constant thrum of generators and distant rotor blades. Here, the theoretical dangers of Fort Leonard Wood became starkly real. The 55th MP Company was tasked with everything from gate security to convoy escorts and training the fledgling Afghan National Police. It was grueling high-stakes work. The line between friend and foe was as hazy as the heat shimmering off the asphalt. It was during this deployment that the incident with the Pashtun-speaking arms smuggler happened. He was a wiry man with a face like a dried riverbed and eyes that held a weary, defiant intelligence. We'll call him Hamid. He was picked up during a routine patrol, his truck laden with what looked like ordinary farming equipment, but a sharp-eyed sergeant had noticed the fresh weld marks on a false bottom. Inside, they found a cache of RPGs and IED components. The initial interrogations went nowhere. Hamid was a stone wall. He sat in the makeshift interrogation room, a plywood box with a single flickering bulb, and said nothing. He stared at the metal table, occasionally looking up at his questioners with utter disdain. The Army interrogators trained in standard techniques tried everything. They tried intimidation, the good cop, bad cop routine, sleep deprivation. They got nothing. Hamid was either a master of resistance, or, as some started to believe, just a simple mule who knew nothing about the wider network. Frustration was mounting. This was a significant find, and the intel from it could prevent future attacks. Captain Davies was under pressure from battalion command. After 2 days of failure, he was desperate. I was on my way back from a patrol caked in dust and sweat when my squad leader told me Captain Davies wanted to see me. I found him in the command tent, hunched over a map, the familiar clenched jaw tight with stress. "Ford," he said, not looking up. "The interrogators are getting nowhere with this smuggler." "He's Pashtun, right?" "Yes, sir," I replied. He finally looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see skepticism in his eyes. I saw desperation. "I heard about that training exercise back at Leonard Wood, the one with the role player." I nodded, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Go in there," he said, his voice low. "See what you can do. You've got 1 hour. Don't break any rules, but get me something. Anything." He was throwing a Hail Mary. He was sending in the dictionary. When I entered the interrogation room, the air was stale and heavy with failure. Hamid didn't even look up. I dismissed the other guard, leaving just the two of us. I didn't sit opposite him in a confrontational pose. Instead, I pulled a chair to the side of the table, creating a more open, less adversarial space. For a long time, I said nothing. I just sat. Then I began to speak, not in English but in Pashto. And not in the clipped, formal tone of an interrogator, but in the gentle, respectful cadence one would use to address an elder. "Peace be upon you, uncle," I began. "They have not brought you tea. This is a poor way to treat a guest, even an unexpected one." His head snapped up. His eyes, which had been dull and defiant, now held a flicker of shock. He saw a young American woman in uniform speaking his language not as a weapon, but as a bridge. He didn't reply, but his stony silence had a crack in it. I continued speaking, not of bombs or networks, but of the land. I spoke of the poetry of Rahman Baba, of the taste of apricots from Kandahar, of the harsh beauty of the mountains that framed our very existence here. I was using my knowledge not to extract information, but to build a connection, a shared understanding of a world he thought I couldn't possibly comprehend. I asked him about his village. I asked him about his family not as a threat, but with genuine curiosity. I told him my tea brewing skills were terrible compared to the way my own grandmother made it. Slowly, hesitantly, he began to talk. He corrected my pronunciation of a particular town. He told me the best apricots came from a different valley. He spoke of his son who had been killed not by Americans, but in a tribal dispute years ago. I listened. I didn't push. I didn't demand. I simply created a space where he felt seen, not as a prisoner, but as a man. Then I shifted. I didn't ask him who he worked for. I asked him, Uncle, the men who gave you this truck, are they the kind of men who honor their word? Are they the kind of men who would protect your family if something happened to you? Or are they the kind of men who would let a good man, a man of honor, take the fall for their dirty business? I was reframing the situation. It wasn't about betraying a cause. It was about protecting his own honor against men who had none. I saw his jaw tighten. I had struck a nerve. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. They are cowards. He finally said the words, a low growl. They hide in the shadows and use men like me. That was the opening. Over the next 30 minutes, he laid it all out. The names, the meeting points, the methods. He wasn't just a mule, he was a logistics coordinator. The information was a goldmine. When I walked out of that room and handed my notes a detailed schematic of a local IED network to a stunned Captain Davies, something shifted permanently. The tide had turned. The next day, I was summoned to a high-level briefing at the battalion headquarters. It was a world away from the grit of the company command post. The air was cool, the chairs were comfortable, and the room was filled with serious high-ranking officers. I stood in the back feeling out of place while Captain Davies presented the intelligence I had gathered. He gave me full credit. The breakthrough came from Captain Ford, he announced to the room. Her unique approach was able to succeed where traditional methods failed. As the briefing concluded, a man I hadn't noticed before approached me. He was older, wearing the rank of a Chief Warrant Officer 5, the highest warrant officer rank. He had kind, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed at odds with the high-strung energy of the room. He carried a tablet computer and his fingers seemed to dance across it as he thought. Captain Ford, he said, extending a hand. I'm Eli Vance. I was listening in on your conversation yesterday, from the signals intelligence side. My stomach dropped. He had heard everything. That wasn't an interrogation, he continued, a small smile playing on his lips. That was art. You didn't break him. You built a bridge, and he walked across it himself. It was remarkable. I was speechless. In a world that had consistently dismissed my skills as useless, this man, this stranger, was calling it art. I work in military intelligence, Eli explained. My world is all about data signals patterns, but data is useless without context. What you did in there, that was pure context. You understood the human element. Most people don't see it. For the first time since I'd put on the uniform, I felt seen, truly seen. Eli didn't see the dictionary or the academic oddity. He saw a soldier with a powerful, unconventional weapon. He saw the linguist and the MP as two halves of a whole. If you ever need someone to help you analyze the data behind the words, he said, tapping his tablet, you know who to call. Eli Vance became my confidant, my mentor. We would meet for coffee, and he would listen. He was the first person I told about the Thanksgiving dinner, about my father and brother. He didn't just listen, he understood. He understood the quiet rebellion that had driven me to enlist. Don't ever let them convince you that what you do isn't a weapon, Eli told me one evening as we watched the sun set over the dusty mountains. It's a scalpel in a world of hammers. It's more precise, and it can do things a hammer never could. Eli's validation was a shield. The nicknames at the company didn't stop overnight. but they lost their sting. My success with Hamid had earned me a new grudging respect. I was no longer just the dictionary. I was the MP who had cracked the uncrackable case. I had proven in the most undeniable way possible that my father and brother were wrong. Words, when used correctly, could be more powerful than any weapon in their arsenal. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally in the right place fighting the right war on my own terms. After the tour in Afghanistan, the 55th MP Company was rotated back to the States for a brief respite before our next assignment, a peacekeeping mission in Bosnia. The transition from the dusty, sun-baked landscape of Central Asia to the lush green hills and war-scarred cities of the Balkans was jarring. The wounds of the Bosnian War were still visible, etched into the facades of bullet-pocked buildings and in the haunted eyes of the older generation. Our mission here was different. It wasn't about counterinsurgency. It was about maintaining a fragile peace. We conducted joint patrols with local police, secured sensitive sites, and acted as a stabilizing presence. The tension wasn't in the open threat of an IED, but in the simmering undercurrent of ethnic hatred that lay just beneath the surface. It was a mission that required diplomacy and restraint, a perfect fit for my skills. Eli, having also rotated to the region, was now a familiar and welcome presence, our professional paths continuing to intersect. He was attached to a signals intelligence unit at the main NATO base, but we made time for our usual coffee and conversations, his analytical perspective a grounding force for me. My relationship with my family, however, remained as fractured as ever. The success in Afghanistan had been met with a stony silence from my father and a dismissive text from Mark that read, "Heard you got lucky." They couldn't acknowledge that my methods, my useless skills, had succeeded. It would have meant admitting they were wrong, and the Thorn men did not admit error. One evening, I was in my small office reviewing patrol schedules when my satellite phone buzzed. The caller ID was a commercial number from the US. It was my father. My heart did a familiar, tense lurch. He never called. Eleanor, his voice was a gruff baritone stripped of any warmth. No, how are you? No pleasantries. Dad, I replied, my own voice cautious. Is everything okay? I need to talk to you about something important, he said. Mark is here with me. I heard my brother's voice murmur in the background. My father had put me on speakerphone. It felt less like a family call and more like an official summons. I'm listening, I said, leaning back in my chair, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. You're aware of the private military contractors operating in your sector. Are you not? My father began. Of course. Aegis Logistics is the main one. They handle supply chain security for a few of the reconstruction projects. I kept my tone professional, purely informational. That's right, my father continued. Aegis is a fine company, patriots, run by good men I know personally. A red flag went up in my mind. My father didn't engage in idle chit-chat or offer endorsements unless he had a motive. There was an incident last week, he said. One of their convoys was involved in a misunderstanding near a town called Vlasenica. I knew the incident he was referring to. It was more than a misunderstanding. An Aegis convoy had been stopped at a checkpoint manned by local police. The Aegis operators, arrogant and dismissive of local authority, had refused to allow their cargo to be inspected. Tempers flared. One of the Aegis men had assaulted a local officer. It had nearly turned into a full-blown firefight before my unit arrived to de-escalate. I had filed the report myself. It was a clear case of contractor misconduct. I'm familiar with the report, sir, I said, deliberately using his rank. Mark's voice cut in sharp and impatient. Dad's being delicate, Nellie. The fact is that report you filed is causing a lot of trouble. It's holding up their contract renewal. It makes Aegis look bad. The dread in my stomach turned to ice. My report was a factual account of the events that transpired, Mark. Their team leader was reckless and instigated the conflict. Details, details, Mark said dismissively. Listen, Dad has business interests connected to Aegis. He sits on the advisory board of their parent company. It's a post-retirement gig he's been setting up. The confession hung in the air, thick and toxic. My father, a serving general of the United States Army, was using his position and his children to protect a future business deal. The blatant corruption of it took my breath away. What are you asking me to do? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. It's simple. My father's voice returned smooth and commanding. Amend your report. Reclassify the incident. Say the local police were non-compliant, that the Aegis team acted appropriately to secure their convoy under duress. It's a matter of wording, Eleanor. Your specialty. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy was staggering. My entire life they had preached honor, duty, and integrity. They had dismissed my skills as frivolous, and now they wanted to use those very skills to weave a web of lies for their own financial gain. They weren't asking me. They were ordering me. No, I said. The word was small, but it felt as solid as a rock. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. What did you say? Mark's voice was incredulous. I said no. I repeated louder this time, my resolve hardening. I will not falsify a report. I will not compromise my integrity or the integrity of my soldiers for your business deal. What you're asking me to do is illegal and dishonorable. The word dishonorable was a deliberate blow, a word I had chosen from their own lexicon. My father's voice, when it came, was stripped of all pretense. It was cold, hard, and menacing. You are a captain in the United States Army, and I am a general. You seem to be forgetting that. This is not a request. You will fix this, Eleanor. Do you understand me? I understand that you are trying to give me an unlawful order. I shot back, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury, and I am respectfully refusing it. I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. The silence of my office was deafening. I felt sick. The betrayal was absolute, a poison that seeped into the very foundations of my identity. The family I had so desperately sought approval from had just revealed themselves to be corrupt to the core. Their honor was a commodity to be bought and sold. A few days later, my unit was tasked with overseeing a peace negotiation in a remote town hall. It was a high-tension meeting between two rival ethnic leaders who had been at each other's throats for months. My job was to be a neutral presence to ensure the meeting wasn't derailed by violence. We established a perimeter, my soldiers positioned at key points. I was inside, standing near the back of the hall, observing the tense but so far civil discussion. Everything seemed routine. Then I felt a buzz from my radio. It was one of my sergeants on outer security. His voice was panicked. Ma'am, we have an unidentified vehicle approaching at high speed. It's not local, it looks like a civilian SUV, but it's armored. Before I could even process his words, the world exploded. The windows of the town hall shattered inwards in a shower of glass and fire. The deafening roar of an explosion threw me across the room. I hit a stone wall, and a searing pain shot through my left leg. The air was thick with smoke, and the screams of the wounded. Through the ringing in my ears and the haze of dust, I saw them. Figures in tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, stormed into the hall, firing indiscriminately. They weren't targeting the ethnic leaders. They were targeting everyone. It was chaos. It was a massacre. I drew my sidearm, my training kicking in despite the pain. I found cover behind an overturned table and returned fire. My soldiers were engaging the attackers from the outside. The firefight was brief, brutal, and loud. As quickly as they had arrived, the attackers retreated, melting back into the chaos they had created. I lay there, propped against the wall, my leg bleeding profusely, the smell of cordite and blood filling my lungs. And in that moment of searing clarity, I knew. This wasn't random ethnic violence. This was a professional hit. The timing, the precision, the equipment, it was all wrong. And it had happened just days after I refused to obey my father's unlawful order. The peace negotiation had been a setup. The attack was designed to destabilize the region to create a crisis. And a crisis, I realized with a horrifying certainty, was good for business, especially for a private military company like Aegis Logistics, who would be first in line for the lucrative new security contracts that would inevitably follow such a violent incident. They hadn't just tried to coerce me, they had tried to eliminate me. I wasn't just a disobedient daughter. I was a loose end. The poison of my family's betrayal had become a physical reality, leaving me bleeding on the floor of a shattered town hall in Bosnia. My own family had tried to have me killed to protect a business deal. The war I thought I was fighting had just become terrifyingly personal. The official story, the one that went into the after-action reports, was that the attack on the town hall was a tragic escalation of local ethnic tensions perpetrated by an unknown extremist faction. It was neat, tidy, and utterly false. I knew it, but I couldn't prove it. My injury, a piece of shrapnel that had torn through my thigh, miraculously missing the femoral artery, was my ticket out of Bosnia. After a brief stay at a military hospital in Germany, I was reassigned. My new post was a desk job at the U.S. Army Military Police School back in the States, a quiet, bureaucratic purgatory for a soldier who was no longer fit for field duty. To the outside world, it was a logical step for a wounded officer. To me, it felt like a prison. They had taken me off the board. I was out of the way, where I couldn't cause any more trouble. The physical pain in my leg was a dull, constant ache, but it was nothing compared to the searing fire of my anger and betrayal. My father and Mark sent flowers to the hospital. The card read, "Get well soon. Your loving family." The hypocrisy was so profound it made me want to scream. I threw the bouquet in the trash without a second thought. I tried to report my suspicions through official channels. I submitted a supplementary report detailing the professional nature of the attack and its suspicious timing relative to my refusal to falsify the Aegis report. My report was acknowledged and then buried. It vanished into the black hole of military bureaucracy. No one wanted to investigate a decorated general. No one wanted to open that can of worms. I was alone, and they were counting on my silence. They were counting on me to accept my fate to fade away into my desk job. They underestimated me. And they underestimated Eli Vance. Eli had been horrified when he heard about the attack. He had visited me in the hospital in Germany, his face grim. He listened intently as I laid out my suspicions, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the edge of his chair. He didn't dismiss my theory as a paranoid delusion. He believed me. "If they did this, Nellie," he had said, his voice low and serious, "they left a trail. Digitally, financially somewhere. People this arrogant always get sloppy." Now back in the States, Eli became my lifeline. He had secured a position as an instructor at the Army's intelligence school, conveniently located just a few hours' drive from my post. Our alliance, once a professional mentorship, now solidified into a clandestine partnership. We were going to conduct our own off-the-books investigation. My new office at the MP school was a small windowless room in the basement of the main administrative building. It was where forgotten files and obsolete training manuals went to die. It was perfect. It was private, overlooked, and no one ever came down here. Eli took one look at the cramped, soundproofed space and dubbed it the Whisper Room. It became our secret headquarters. While I was officially tasked with updating training curricula, my real work began after hours. I used my security clearance to access every report, every document, every piece of communication related to Aegis Logistics operations in the Balkan theater. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun. I was looking for something much more subtle. I was looking for patterns. I was using my linguistic skills not to build bridges but to deconstruct lies. I began to analyze their written reports, hundreds of them, from daily sit reps to formal incident summaries. I wasn't just reading them for content. I was analyzing their very structure, their syntax, their word choices. Corporate and military communications have a specific jargon, a rhythm. When people are lying, that rhythm changes. I started to notice tells. In reports detailing routine operations, the language was concise, active, and used standard military terminology. But in the reports surrounding controversial incidents like the one at the checkpoint or the aftermath of the town hall attack, the language became convoluted. They used the passive voice, "mistakes were made," instead of "we made a mistake." Sentences became longer, filled with qualifying clauses and vague, evasive jargon. There was an over-reliance on adverbs to emotionally color the events in their favor. I was building a linguistic profile of their deception. I couldn't prove they were lying from this alone, but I was mapping out exactly where the lies were. I was creating a target list of suspicious events and reports. Meanwhile, Eli was working his own brand of magic from his end. He was the digital ghost, the whisper in the machine. He couldn't legally hack into Aegis's private servers, but he could meticulously comb through the records of their interactions with Army networks. Every time a contractor accesses a classified Army server, they leave a digital footprint. He explained to me one night in the whisper room, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. "I'm looking for unauthorized access for someone from Aegis looking at files they had no business looking at." Weeks turned into a month, then 2. It was painstaking, frustrating work. We were chasing shadows fueled by coffee and a shared sense of righteous anger. The breakthrough came from Eli. His eyes were wide with excitement when he called me. "I've got it, Nellie," he said, his voice a hushed whisper over the secure line. "I found it. Unauthorized access to the Bosnia mission server, specifically the file containing the advance schedule for your peace negotiation oversight mission." The access request was routed through a proxy server in Panama, but I peeled it back. The origin IP address traces back to the corporate headquarters of Aegis Logistics in Reston, Virginia. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the connection. They knew my exact location. "There's more," he said. "The user who accessed it downloaded the file, and they left something behind. They were sloppy. They tried to scrub their activity log, but they failed. I found a corrupted data fragment. It's an audio file, encrypted. It took Eli another week of sleepless nights to decrypt the file. When he finally succeeded, he drove straight to my base. We huddled together in the whisper room, the only light coming from his laptop screen. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. He hit play. The audio was scratchy, filled with static, but the voice was unmistakable. It was my brother Mark. He was talking to someone, his voice arrogant and dismissive. "No, the asset is in place," Mark was saying. "The package will be delivered during the meeting. It will look like a local dispute gone wrong. Total chaos. It will make the case for enhanced security protocols perfectly. Dad's friends at Aegis will be heroes, and their contract is as good as renewed. As for my sister, she'll either be a tragic casualty or she'll never open her mouth again. Either way, the problem is solved." The cold, casual way he discussed my potential death made me feel hollow. This wasn't just corruption, it was monstrous. But Eli wasn't done. He had kept digging. "After I found the IP address, I looked at Aegis's contract modifications," he said, pulling up another file. "Look at this." On the screen was a contract addendum dated 2 days after the attack in Bosnia. It was a massive budget increase for Aegis Logistics, citing the recent destabilization of the security environment. It was approved and fast-tracked. And at the bottom of the page was the authorizing signature: General Marcus Thorne. We had it all. The motive, the digital trail, the audio confession, and the financial payoff. We had the scalpel, and we were ready to make the cut. The whispers in our secret room were about to become a roar that would shake the very foundations of the Pentagon. For a week, we did nothing. We sat on a bomb, a collection of files on a heavily encrypted hard drive that could shatter careers' lives, and the carefully constructed legacy of a 4-star general. The question wasn't what we had, but what to do with it. My first instinct was to go to the press to leak the entire story and watch the ensuing firestorm. Eli Ever, the strategist, counseled caution. If we leak it, it becomes a media circus, he argued, pacing the small confines of the whisper room. They'll hire lawyers, PR firms. They'll muddy the waters, discredit you as a disgruntled, unstable soldier. They'll say the audio is fake, the data misinterpreted. We have one shot at this, Nellie. We can't just wound them. We have to guarantee a kill shot. He was right. My father was a master manipulator of perception. He wouldn't be brought down by a headline. He needed to be dismantled by the very system he professed to serve. There's only one person who can do this. Eli said, his pacing stopping. Someone with the authority to bypass the chain of command and the integrity to see it through. Someone your father can't intimidate. He said a name I hadn't considered. General Shepard. General Shepard was a legend in the Army. He was the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a soldier's soldier known for his quiet integrity and his absolute intolerance for corruption. He was famously apolitical, a man who had risen to the top on pure merit. He was also, crucially, a professional rival of my father's. They came from different schools of thought. Shepard, the quiet professional, my father, the political animal. There was no love lost between them. Getting to Shepard would be nearly impossible. He was insulated by layers of aides and protocols. A captain from the MP school couldn't just request a meeting. This was where Eli's genius for navigating the system came into play. He didn't try to go through official channels. He used his contacts in the intelligence community to find a back door. He found Shepard's senior aide, a colonel he had served with years ago, a man who owed him a favor. Eli made the call. He didn't reveal the details, only that a captain under his mentorship had uncovered evidence of high-level corruption that posed a direct threat to the integrity of the Army and that it involved General Thorne. It was a gamble. The colonel could have shut him down, reported him for breaking chain of command, but the colonel knew Eli's reputation. He agreed to arrange a meeting. A discreet, off-the-record meeting. A week later, I found myself in a featureless conference room in a quiet corner of the Pentagon. I was in my full dress uniform, my hands sweating. Eli sat beside me, a calming presence. General Shepard entered the room alone. He was older than he looked in photos, his face etched with the weight of his command, but his eyes were sharp and incredibly perceptive. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He sat with us as an equal. "Captain Ford, Warrant Officer Vance," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Colonel Reynolds speaks very highly of you, Mr. Vance. He said this was a matter of utmost importance. The floor is yours." My voice trembled as I began, but as I laid out the story from the Thanksgiving dinner to the conversation with Hamid, to the phone call from my father and the attack in Bosnia, my voice grew stronger. I was no longer the frightened victim. I was the lead investigator presenting her case. I recounted the long nights in the whisper room, my linguistic analysis of the Aegis reports. Then Eli took over. He calmly and methodically detailed the digital trail, the IP addresses, the server logs. Finally, we came to the core of our evidence. Eli plugged the encrypted hard drive into a secure laptop he had brought. "General, what you are about to hear is an audio file recovered from a compromised Army server. The primary speaker is Mark Thorne." He pressed play. Mark's voice filled the silent room, cold and clear. "The asset is in place. Package will be delivered. Dad's friends at Aegis will be heroes. As for my sister, She'll either be a tragic casualty, or she'll never open her mouth again. Shepard's face remained impassive, but I saw a muscle tighten in his jaw. He listened to the entire recording without interruption. When it was over, a profound silence settled over the room. Eli then pulled up the final piece of evidence, the contract addendum with my father's signature glowing on the screen. Shepard stared at the screen for a long moment. He then looked at me, his gaze intense. He wasn't looking at a captain. He was looking at the daughter of the man he was about to destroy. "Captain," he said, his voice low, "you understand the implications of this. This will not be quiet. This will not be a simple retirement. This will be the end of your father's career and his legacy. It will tear your family apart." "Sir," I replied, my voice steady. "My family tore itself apart when they chose profit over honor. My father's legacy is a lie. I'm not here as his daughter. I'm here as an officer of the United States Army reporting a crime." A flicker of respective approval crossed Shepard's face. He stood up. "Warrant Officer Vance, transfer all your files to my secure server. Captain Ford, you will both return to your duties and you will not speak of this meeting to anyone. You are now witnesses in a formal investigation. Is that understood?" "Yes, General," we both said in unison. "Good," he said. He paused at the door. "Captain, it takes a rare kind of courage to do what you just did. Your father taught you about strength. You taught yourself about honor." He left. Eli and I sat in the silence, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving us exhausted. We had fired the weapon. Now all we could do was wait for the impact. The next few weeks were an agony of silence. We heard nothing. It was as if our meeting had never happened. I started to doubt, to wonder if Shepard had decided to bury it after all, to protect the institution from a scandal of this magnitude. Then I received an official invitation in the mail. It was for the annual Armed Forces Awards Gala, a glittering black-tie event held at the Pentagon celebrating service and achievement. I had been invited as a special guest of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A handwritten note was included with the invitation. It was from General Shepard. It contained only 4 words. "The stage is set." I looked at the invitation again and saw the name of the keynote speaker and the recipient of this year's Lifetime Achievement Award, General Marcus Thorne. Shepard wasn't going to bury my father in a quiet back room. He was going to give him a stage, a spotlight, and an audience of his peers. And then he was going to burn it all to the ground. It was a strategy of breathtaking audacity, a public execution of a man's honor. And he wanted me to have a front row seat. The ballroom at the Pentagon was a sea of dress uniforms and elegant gowns. Medals glittered like constellations under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. The air was filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of glasses. It was the apex of the military social world, a room overflowing with power, influence, and tradition. And tonight, it was the stage for my father's greatest triumph and his ultimate downfall. I stood in a quiet corner, a glass of untouched champagne in my hand. I was wearing my own dress uniform, the medals I had earned, including the Purple Heart from the attack in Bosnia, pinned to my chest. They felt heavier than usual tonight. Eli was by my side, a silent, reassuring presence in his own immaculate uniform. He had also been invited as a guest of General Shepard. We were the only 2 people in this entire crowded room who knew what was coming. The knowledge felt like a live wire under my skin. I saw my father across the room. He was holding court, surrounded by a circle of admirers, other generals, politicians, defense contractors. He was in his element, laughing, shaking hands, the personification of authority and success. He looked every bit the legend he had so carefully crafted for himself. Beside him stood Mark, smug and triumphant in his own uniform, basking in their father's reflected glory. My mother was there too, elegant and poised, a practiced smile on her face. She caught my eye for a brief moment. I saw a flicker of unease of questioning before she looked away. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew something was broken. My father eventually saw me. He excused himself from his circle and walked towards me, Mark trailing in his wake. "Eleanor," he said, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "I'm glad you could make it. It's a big night." He was playing the part of the proud father for the benefit of the onlookers. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask about my leg. He just stood there expecting me to play my part in his grand performance. I wouldn't miss it, I said, my voice even betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Mark looked at my uniform, a sneer playing on his lips. "Look at you, Nellie, all dressed up." Finally decided to play soldier properly. Before I could reply, the lights in the ballroom dimmed and a voice over the loudspeaker called for everyone to take their seats. The ceremony was about to begin. My father gave me a final dismissive nod and headed towards the head table on the dais. Eli and I found our assigned seats. They were in the front row, directly facing the stage. Shepard had orchestrated every detail. He wanted us to see every flicker of emotion on their faces. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance: the presentation of the colors, the national anthem, a series of opening remarks. Then General Shepard walked to the podium to introduce the guest of honor. A hush fell over the ballroom. Shepard stood at the podium, a figure of quiet authority. He looked out over the audience, his gaze sweeping the room before settling for a brief moment on me. "We are here tonight to celebrate excellence, to honor service, and to reaffirm the values that bind us together." He began, his voice calm and resonant. "Values like honor, integrity, and courage." But integrity is not just about battlefield heroics. It's about the difficult choices made in quiet rooms. It's about the courage to put truth before self and duty before personal gain. I could see my father on the dais smiling, assuming the speech was a preamble to his own introduction. Shepard continued, "In today's complex world, our security relies not only on our soldiers, but on a network of partners, including private contractors. We entrust them with great responsibility, and we hold them to the highest standards. We expect them to operate with the same integrity we demand of ourselves. But sometimes that trust is broken. Sometimes the lines between duty and profit become blurred." A nervous murmur rippled through the room. This was not the standard laudatory speech everyone was expecting. My father's smile had frozen on his face. Mark was frowning, looking confused. "Recently," Shepard said, his voice hardening slightly, "a threat was detected. Not from a foreign adversary, but from within. A threat to our very integrity. A security breach on a mission-critical server in the Balkan theater, followed by a coordinated effort to cover it up." The room was now utterly silent. You could hear a pin drop. Every eye was on Shepard. My father's face had gone pale. This breach led to an attack on a peacekeeping mission, an attack that wounded a United States Army captain and killed several local civilians. The subsequent cover-up was authorized at the highest levels, all to protect a lucrative business deal. Shepard paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He looked directly at my father. The architects of this betrayal believed they were above reproach, protected by their rank and their influence. They believed their actions would remain hidden in the shadows. Tonight we bring them into the light. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. Shepard gestured to the large screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the award ceremony logo. The logo vanished, replaced by the familiar interface of an audio player. "We have evidence," Shepard declared. "A recording. A conversation detailing the plan to manufacture a crisis for profit and to silence a fellow officer." My father shot to his feet. "This is an outrage. General Shepard, what is the meaning of this?" "Sit down, General Thorne." Shepard commanded, his voice like steel. "You are out of order." My father, stunned by the public rebuke, slowly sank back into his chair. He looked trapped, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. And then, Shepard pressed play. My brother's voice, amplified by the ballroom's sound system, echoed through the vast, silent space. The asset is in place. Package will be delivered. Dad's friends at Aegis will be heroes. As for my sister, she'll either be a tragic casualty or she'll never open her mouth again. Either way, the problem is solved. A collective gasp went through the audience. People were turning in their seats, staring at my father and Mark in horror. My mother's face had crumpled, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark looked like he had been turned to stone, his face ashen. When the audio ended, the silence was deafening, accusatory. Shepard's voice cut through it like a knife. Honor is not a title. It is not a medal. It is not a legacy passed down like an inheritance. It is a choice made every day, and some, it seems, have chosen poorly. He then looked directly at me. Captain Eleanor Ford, please join me on stage. My legs felt weak as I stood up. Every eye in the room was on me. I walked the few steps to the dais, my back straight, my gaze fixed forward. I didn't look at my father or my brother. I couldn't. I stood beside General Shepard, facing the sea of shocked faces. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the academic oddity. I was the catalyst, the survivor, the woman who had brought down a giant. Shepard placed a hand on my shoulder. This, he said to the room, his voice ringing with conviction, is what honor looks like. The downfall was absolute, public, and brutal. As military police, alerted by Shepard, entered the ballroom and discreetly approached the head table, I stood on that stage and watched the carefully constructed world of General Marcus Thorne shatter into a million pieces. The grandest stage had become his scaffold. And the truth, my truth, had been the executioner's axe. The aftermath was swift and merciless. The Pentagon Gala became the epicenter of a scandal that sent shockwaves through the military and the defense industry. The media, catching the scent of blood, descended in a frenzy. The story of the corrupt general and his complicit son was on every news channel, every front page. Mark was taken into custody that very night, escorted out of the ballroom by the same MPs he had once held in such contempt. His smugness had evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed terror. The charges against him were overwhelming conspiracy, attempted murder, violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. His career was not just over, it was annihilated. My father was not arrested immediately. A man of his rank required a more delicate, deliberate dismantling. He was suspended from duty, his security clearances revoked. He was confined to his quarters pending a full investigation that everyone knew was just a formality. His public disgrace was the real punishment. The Lifetime Achievement Award he was meant to receive became a symbol of his hubris. The name Thorne, once synonymous with honor and legacy, was now a byword for corruption and shame. Aegis Logistics imploded. Their contracts were frozen, their executives subpoenaed. The web of deceit we had uncovered unraveled with astonishing speed. I was placed on administrative leave, shielded from the media storm by the protective bubble of the Army. General Shepard's office handled all inquiries. I was a witness, a key figure, but they protected me from the glare of the spotlight. I spent my days in my quiet apartment, the silence a welcome respite after the roar of the gala. Eli was a constant presence, a steady anchor in the turbulent waters. He would bring coffee, sit with me, and we would talk not about the investigation, but about the future. About what comes next when the war is finally over. My mother called me once. Her voice was a fragile whisper broken by sobs. She didn't accuse me. She didn't defend my father. She just asked, why? How could this happen? I didn't have an answer for her that she would understand. How do you explain to someone that the entire foundation of their life was a lie? Our conversation was short, painful, and ultimately hollow. The chasm between us was now a canyon too wide to bridge. A week after the gala, I received a formal request. My father wanted to see me. He was being held at a secure facility pending his court-martial. Against Eli's advice, I agreed. I needed to see him one last time to close this chapter myself. The meeting took place in a sterile, impersonal room, not unlike the interrogation room where I had spoken to Hamid. There was a simple table and 2 chairs. He was already there when I entered, wearing a plain duty uniform stripped of all its medals and insignia. He looked smaller, older. The granite had crumbled, revealing the frail, bitter man beneath. He didn't look at me as I sat down. He stared at his hands resting on the table. "You destroyed me," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You destroyed this family. Everything I built for generations. Gone. For what?" "For some misguided sense of righteousness, I didn't destroy you, Dad," I replied, my voice steady. "You did. You and Mark. You made choices. This is the consequence." He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a venomous rage. "You were always a disappointment, Eleanor. Weak. Lost in your books. I tried to make you strong. I tried to give you a path to honor, and you spit on it. You allied yourself with my enemies, and you tore down your own house." "My path to honor was never the same as yours," I said. "My honor isn't for sale. It's not a tool to secure business deals. You talk about strength, but what you did was weak. You were afraid of losing a contract, afraid of being exposed. So you tried to silence me. You tried to have your own daughter killed." He flinched at the accusation, the first crack in his self-righteous armor. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Mark got carried away. The plan was just to scare you. To scare me into silence. I finished for him. To protect your legacy." "But what is that legacy, Dad? A collection of medals. A name in a history book. It's hollow. It's a lie you told yourself for so long you started to believe it." We sat in silence for a long moment. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by something else. Something I couldn't quite read. He reached into his pocket and placed a small, heavy object on the table between us. It was his West Point ring. The iconic gold ring, a symbol of the long gray line of duty, honor, country. It was the most sacred object he owned. "This should have been Mark's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And then his son's. It represents everything we are, everything we were." He pushed it across the table towards me. "You take it. You won. You have the strength now. You carry the legacy." I stared at the ring. It was a final, desperate move. A manipulative gesture designed to burden me with the very legacy I had just dismantled. He was trying to pass his broken crown to me, to trap me in the wreckage of his life. I looked from the ring back to his face. And I saw him for what he was, a pathetic, broken man still trying to control the narrative, still trying to win. I slowly pushed the ring back across the table to him. "You still don't get it," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Honor isn't in a ring, Dad. It's in your actions. And you have to live with yours." I stood up. I had said everything I needed to say. There was nothing left but ashes. As I walked to the door, he spoke one last time, his voice barely a whisper. "That day, with the smuggler, in Afghanistan. How did you do it?" The question caught me off guard. After everything he was asking about my methods, about the one thing he had always dismissed. I paused at the door, my back still to him. "I listened," I said. "That's all. I just listened." I walked out of the room and didn't look back. The weight of the Thorn legacy, a weight I had carried my entire life, finally lifted from my shoulders. I was free. The end of my father's story was a quiet affair, a stark contrast to the explosive nature of his downfall. He was court-martialed, found guilty, and stripped of his rank and pension. He was sentenced to time in a military prison, a final ignominious end to a storied career. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of the Pentagon. With the legal proceedings concluded, my own future came into focus. I had a choice to make. My leg had healed, though it still ached in the cold, a permanent reminder of my time in Bosnia. I was cleared for active duty. I could have returned to the field to a command of my own. General Shepard's office made it clear that my career prospects were bright. I was the hero of the hour, the captain who had stared down corruption and won. But something inside me had changed. The war I had been fighting was over. The need to prove myself to my family, the anger that had fueled me for so long, had dissipated. Standing in the field leading patrols, it all felt like a life that belonged to someone else now. The uniform was no longer a costume or a shield. It was just a job, and my heart was no longer in it. I found my answer not in the field, but back where my secret war had truly been fought, in the quiet, dusty basement of the MP school. In the whisper room. I formally requested a permanent assignment as an instructor at the school. It was an unusual move for an officer with my record, and it raised a few eyebrows. Most ambitious officers saw teaching as a career sidetrack, but General Shepard understood. He approved my request immediately. I didn't want to just teach the standard curriculum, the by-the-book procedures for law and order operations. I wanted to teach what I had learned. I wanted to teach the power of the scalpel in a world of hammers. I submitted a proposal for a new course, a specialized elective for senior NCOs and junior officers. I called it Strategic Intercultural Engagement. It was a dry, academic-sounding title for a radical idea. It was a course on empathy as a tactical tool. My proposal outlined a curriculum that went far beyond standard operating procedures. It included modules on applied linguistics, cultural anthropology, nonverbal communication, and de-escalation psychology. It was about teaching soldiers how to read a room, not just how to clear it. It was about understanding the human terrain as well as the physical one. It was about teaching them how to build bridges, not just walls. The core of my course was built around the lessons I had learned from Hamid the arms smuggler. It was about finding the human being inside the enemy, about understanding their motivations, their honor, their fears. It was about the art of the question. To my surprise, the proposal was met with enthusiasm. The success of my unconventional methods in Afghanistan and the high-profile nature of the Thorn case had given me a unique kind of capital. The Army, always looking for an edge, was willing to experiment. My course was approved. The Whisper Room. Once our clandestine headquarters became my official office, Eli had helped me clean it out. We replaced the dusty file cabinets with bookshelves, which I filled with my own books' texts on linguistics, history, poetry. We brought in a small coffee maker and a comfortable chair. It was no longer a secret war room. It was a sanctuary of knowledge. Eli, who continued his work at the intelligence school, would often visit. He still called it the Whisper Room, because this is where you'll teach the quiet weapons, he'd say with a smile. The ones the enemy never hears coming. My first class was a group of 20 seasoned soldiers. They walked in with the same skepticism I had faced when I first joined the 55th MP Company. They were combat veterans, tough and pragmatic. They looked at me, a captain with a limp standing in a classroom talking about intercultural engagement, and I could see the doubt in their eyes. They were expecting a dry, boring lecture. I didn't start with a PowerPoint presentation. I started with a story. I told them about Hamid. I told them about the failed interrogations, the frustration, the desperation. I told them how I sat down not as an interrogator but as a person, and how I spoke of poetry and apricots. I described how building a small bridge of shared humanity had succeeded where every hammer of intimidation had failed. As I spoke, I watched their posture change. They leaned forward. The skepticism in their eyes was replaced by curiosity, then by dawning recognition. They had all been in situations where force wasn't the answer, where they had faced a wall of cultural misunderstanding they didn't have the tools to break down. I was giving them new tools. I taught them that intellect was not a liability, it was a force multiplier. I taught them that empathy wasn't weakness, it was a form of intelligence. I brought in guest speakers, anthropologists, former diplomats, even reformed gang leaders to talk about the power of communication in high-stakes environments. The course was a success. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The soldiers left my classroom with a new perspective, a new set of skills that would make them not just better soldiers, but better leaders. I had found my purpose. It wasn't in chasing promotions or commanding battalions. It was here in this quiet basement room passing on the hard-won lessons of my own journey. I was no longer fighting my father's war or the army's war. I was fighting for a new kind of soldier, one who understood that the greatest strength lies not in the ability to kick down a door, but in the wisdom to know when to knock, and the skill to know what to say when it opens. The whispers from this room, I hoped, would one day become a powerful new voice within the army. Years passed. The dust settled. The scandal of General Thorne faded into the annals of military history. My life found a new rhythm, a quiet, fulfilling cadence defined by the semester schedule and the young, eager faces in my classroom. The Whisper Room became a well-known institution within the MP school, and my course on strategic intercultural engagement became one of the most sought-after electives. My limp was a permanent part of me now, a gentle reminder of the price of truth. I rarely thought about my father or Mark. They belonged to a different lifetime, a different version of myself. I had found peace not by forgetting the past, but by transforming it into a lesson for the future. Eli remained my closest friend. Our bond, forged in secrecy and righteous anger, had mellowed into a comfortable, easy companionship. He was my intellectual sparring partner, my confidant, and the one person who understood the entire arc of my journey. One afternoon, a small package arrived at my office. It was a padded envelope with no return address, postmarked from a small town in Florida, where my mother's only sister, my Aunt Carol, lived. My mother had passed away 2 years prior, and I had maintained a polite, if distant, relationship with my aunt. I opened the envelope. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, was a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of me at about 8 years old. I was sitting on the front porch of our old house in Arlington, a huge, hardbound French dictionary open on my lap. I had a look of intense, joyful concentration on my face, my brow furrowed as I traced the words with my finger. I remembered that dictionary. It had been a birthday gift, the one gift I had truly wanted that year. Tucked behind the photo was a small folded note written in my aunt's familiar, elegant script. "Nellie, I was going through some of your mother's old photo albums and found this. She had kept it on her bedside table for years. After the trouble, your father sent it to her. He didn't write a note, but she told me he said one thing. This is who she always was. I should have seen it. I thought you should have it." With love, Aunt Carol, I stared at the photograph, the ghost of that 8-year-old girl looking back at me. The girl who loved words more than anything. The girl who my father and brother had tried to erase to mold into their own image. And in his own broken, indirect way, my father had finally acknowledged her. He had finally seen that my greatest strength wasn't something I had acquired in the army, but something I had carried with me all along. It wasn't a rebellion against him. It was the very essence of who I was. The linguist. The girl with the dictionary. A sense of profound closure washed over me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution for what he had done. It was simply an ending. The final whisper in a long and tumultuous story. I looked around my office at the bookshelves filled with stories and histories from around the world. I looked at the curriculum for my next class, a lesson plan on the strategic importance of cultural narratives. I had built a career, a purpose, a life out of that little girl's passion. I had taken the one thing they called useless and made it my shield, my weapon, and ultimately, my gift to others. I found an old frame in my desk drawer and placed the photograph on my desk right next to my computer. It was a picture of where I had started and a testament to how far I had come. That afternoon, a young, bright-eyed sergeant stopped by my office after class. "Ma'am," she said, "that story you told about the smuggler, it really made me think. I never thought about language that way. As a tool to connect, not just to command." I smiled. "It's the most powerful tool we have, Sergeant." "I get it now," she said, a look of genuine excitement on her face. "It's not about being soft. It's about being smart." "Exactly," I replied. "It's about being smart." As she left, I looked at the photo of the little girl on the porch, lost in her world of words. She hadn't been a disappointment. She hadn't been weak or useless. She had been right all along, and she had finally found her way home.